House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan joins me now. Mr. Chairman, how do you assess President Trump's first 100 days?
100 days of winning. Borders secure. Military recruitment is now off the charts, and all these agencies actually serve we the people instead of being weaponized against we the people like they were under Joe Biden. So again, 100 days of winning. President Trump doing what he said he would do and getting things done.
I recall us battling against Merrick Garland's Justice Department, against Christopher Wray and James Comey when they wouldn't answer basic questions to allow the Congress to do oversight. I even remember you and I having to go and try to bleed some answers out of Jeff Sessions and his regime. How different is it for you as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee working with Pam Bondi and Kash Patel for the American people?
No, great point. We had dinner with Pam last night, Matt. Pam and Todd Blanche and Emil and Kash and Dan Bongino and the whole team. And it was, I told them, I said, night and day, literally night and day. We sent 7 subpoenas to Kash like 9 weeks ago. That we got all the information response in a timely fashion, which, as you remember, we never got from Garland, we never got from Wray, let alone from Comey and Holder and all those things way back when. So, yeah, it is complete, just 180 degrees different. You actually have people in the Justice Department who respect the American citizen and are actually there to serve and hold people accountable and enforce the rule of law. So, yeah, very refreshing.
You are still on that accountability trail. You want answers from some of the Jack Smith prosecutors and are still pursuing their testimony before the committee. What do you hope to learn from those prosecutors?
Well, remember when Jay Bratt told Stanley Woodward, a lawyer for one of the defendants, that the government was going, Jack Smith and his team were going after, actually the guy who worked for the president, he said, we didn't know that you were a Trump guy. We thought you were interested in this judge position. Well, you know, Matt, you can't do that, but they did. We have testimony that confirms they did that. We want to ask Jay Bratt about that situation and a host of other things. We remember we had Mr. D'Antuono here in the Washington field office who talked about how that raid was done on President Trump's home. We're going to have questions about that issue too. But the fact that they went to President Trump's house, went through his home, never happened in the history of our country, should not have happened. We have questions about that, and we've got some answers to those questions.
I am glad you're pursuing that, because dangling a judgeship in front of Walt Nauda's lawyer to try to get Walt Nauda to perjure himself against President Trump was probably one of the more underreported evil things that we saw emerge out of this. And we don't want that justice system to happen for our friends or our enemies. It's just cruel and awful. We have seen some important legislation come out of your committee. Representative Issa's legislation on these nationwide injunctions. Our viewers are very frustrated that all of the work President Trump is pouring into his agenda gets undone by the stroke of a judge's pen. Where do you think that stands in the Senate? I know the House of Representatives has done its important work on it.
Yeah, we passed it. It's a good bill. It simply says that when some federal judge tries to act like president and issues an injunction, the injunction only applies to the parties in the case in that respective jurisdiction. It doesn't apply nationwide. That's just good common sense. And by the way, it's a policy that even Justice Kagan has expressed support for in the past. So we're hopeful that actually there'll be a handful of Democrat senators who will see the light and do the right thing and pass that legislation along with the Republicans in the Senate. It is a good bill. It recognizes a fundamental fact. Article 2, Section 1, first sentence says executive power shall be vested in a president of these United States. Not in anyone else, not in some federal judge, not in approximately 700 federal district judges that are around the country, in the president, the guy who put his name on the ballot, stood for election, and was elected by we the people. So, yeah, this is a good bill. We're doing that along with oversight, and I do think we got to use it, something you've talked about a lot, use the power of the purse to maybe rein in some of these judges as well.
So I want to talk a little bit about due process around these deportations, Mr. Chairman. The Biden administration let nearly 20 million people into the country, and if your job was lost, if you had an extra long line at the emergency room, you got no due process for that. That was just a condition you had to deal with. What due process should exist for people who are not in the country legally as they're being deported?
Not the same due process for that we have for American citizens. And one of those other situations you remember is when we went to Yuma, Arizona, and they told us that the hospital was full because of all the migrants coming in illegally, that you had to go to Phoenix. If you were delivering a child in your own community, you couldn't do that. So this is what happens, and yet the Democrats say, bring the bad guy back who's here illegally, and a court found that was part of an international terrorist organization, bring him back for some additional process. That's not how it works. Due process for American citizens. You are innocent until proven guilty. You have the right to all kinds of good due process, but not the same for people who a court has found who are in the country illegally and part of an international terrorist organization. This is fun. That to me is the fundamental difference: citizen versus non-citizen.
One final question for you, Mr. Chairman, and it is an issue where you and I have had some disagreement in the past, but I know you never mind chopping it up with me. You are proposing to move a substantial amount of antitrust enforcement out of the FTC into the Department of Justice. My concern is that could weaken enforcement of antitrust and could hurt consumers. Why do you see this as a good thing for the consumers in the country?
Yeah, first of all, you got two agencies doing the same thing, and there's no rhyme or reason to who gets what case, who gets another. I think that's just not efficient government. Second, I trust Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, Emil Bove, that team there to do this job. I think, do you want that same team that's been doing the work we've seen over these first 100 days? I think you want them enforcing antitrust law and dealing with these kind of issues. And this is a bill that Senator Lee has sponsored in the Senate. Speaker Johnson sponsored in the House. We've passed it before. It's good legislation that makes sense. Now, in reconciliation, we're not doing the bill. We're just moving revenue from FTC to DOJ so that they can implement and focus on the type of regulatory reform and antitrust concerns that exist. You have to say it that way, and that's the right way to deal with it. And then we're doing it with revenue and spending in the reconciliation bill.
I would add Gail Slater, the head of antitrust at the Department of Justice, to those we certainly trust. Former staffer for Vice President J.D. Vance, your fellow Ohioan. Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, thanks as always for joining the program and for all the great work you're doing in the House of Representatives.
You bet. Thank you. Keep up the good work.